Welcome to Spirited Dialogue hosted by Transformative. I'm Gautam Palapa,
I'm Asanka Besinga.
and we are the co founders of Transformative, where our mission is to transform organizations through technology and empathy. In our previous episode, we talked about how we can enhance the customer experience by using a digital double that combines human identity and personality, operating based on their intent and situation. It was a really interesting conversation that we had, and we got a lot of feedback. So, thank you for the discussions and the thoughts that you provided. The other thing that we also cautioned was that as we move towards developing digital personalities, it is really important to take a pragmatic approach and consider the ethical and privacy implications for humans while ensuring appropriate safeguards are in place. And so, in this episode, what we decided to do is we would dive deeper into how we can improve the experience economy. And we decided to explore how we can leverage first principles for innovative product development. First principles, by definition, are the fundamental concepts or assumptions on which a theory or a system or a method is based. And first principles thinking is a way to reverse engineer complex problems and encourage creativity. It involves breaking down these problems into basic elements and then reassembling them from the ground up. And product managers use first principles a lot to solve complex problems beyond the conventional methods or analogies. And when they're used effectively, they allow us to scientifically solve problems and create solutions beyond what was possible when using these conventional approaches, analogies, or prior experiences. And contrary to what people think, this is actually not a new concept, right? The first principles approach has been referenced in as early as Aristotle in his thesis physics, and Descartes in his method of doubt. So it's been there for a long time. It's only become popular in modern times, especially since the industrial age. And Henry Ford and Elon Musk are examples of people who employed those first principles thinking a lot. So, in the case of Henry Ford, when manufacturing a car for the masses, Ford asked, what would it cost to build a car if it was broken down into its most basic materials and a more efficient way to putting it together was utilized? And that question that he asked revolutionized mass production of cars. And then there's the story of how SpaceX was formed. The story goes, and I think Elon talked about it in one of the videos where he consulted several companies, and then he learned that the cost of a single rocket would be like probably 60 million or 65 million. And so he used the first principle thinking to reframe the question on creating and manufacturing the rocket. And so, using that approach, he found that the value of the materials that were used to create a rocket was only 2% of that 60 million or 65 million that was quoted. And so, the story goes is that he created SpaceX so he could build the rockets cheaper himself. And so, if it weren't for this approach, who knows? Maybe we are only going to be using faster horses, or maybe we had to wait for another 20 years for reusable rockets. And that is the power of first principles thinking. The first step is to identify and then challenge the assumptions that are there. The second step is to separate the problem into its fundamental principles. And then the third step is to use our understanding to create new strategies and solutions to the problem. And that's first principles thinking in a nutshell. Asamka, do you want to give some of the examples where first principles thinking has really transformed organizations?
Yeah, I think so. You frame it nicely, and why it's not new. The concept is not new. By why it is not popular, I think we can little bit touch on that and then get into the examples. I think first principles thinking in that first principles is not easy, as well as applying first principles is not easy. You need deep thinking. So reasoning by analogy is really easy. So people do that, copy somebody or look at what exactly other people are doing and touch the problem at the surface level and get into solutions rather than they go through this particular process. So you need a lot of effort. I think that's why it has not become mainstream. But all the success cases that you explain came from first principles. So I think it's good to go back to these fundamentals and then relook at these problems. So yes, I encountered many occasions that how first principles help in these large digital transformation projects that I have involved. Out of those, I will take one example. So I was working in a large manufacturing plant on their transformation journey. So they had a strategy like where they want to be, but they were struggling to apply it and then create value and outcomes. So that's the stage that I got involved. So we had this steering committee and then we were discussing, and their CEO also joined the conversation and he was listening to the conversation. And there were various ideas came from how process optimization and those kind of stuff within the organization, what kind of applications that they can build. But CEO finally he start contributing to the conversation, and then he said the primary problem in the organization is people leaving. It's really hard to keep people. So if technology can help to solve this problem, that kind of will make his day. So we took his problem statement and then we went back and try to identify why people leaving. So we dig into the problem and then try to understand, and we identify it's not everybody. A specific group is leaving, and there's a huge frustration among that group. So when we looked at the reason for the frustration, it was about the data entry. There's a huge amount of data entry that they have to do when they take a order from a customer, and then they are dealing with other suppliers. They have to enter huge amount of data set. With that process, it's really hard to make changes, and in a business like that, changes are frequent because some of the customers might change the order and they might have to add new stuff to the previous order. Like the various changes can happen from the field or the sales point of view. They should be able to do a change. But at that point when we engage, it was around 2 to 3 days time required to do a simple change to a existing order. Then we started looking at a solution for this problem, and we identify even they are receiving digitally encrypted data through EDI. So these poor merchandisers, they read a EDI file, export it to Excel to increase the readability, and then from that particular Excel sheet, they key in the data into the system. And since they are a little bit busy with customers, they hired a data entry team to do that. So merchandisers sit with the data entry team and doing this process. And there was around 100 people entering data every day because it's a huge business. So then
Wow.
it was an easy solution for us, because if the data is coming through EDI, you can easily
Right.
import it to the systems, and we can augment the data, and if there are any verification need to be done, we can do it electronically, and there can be some data cleansing and data cleaning needed in some of the cases. So in a particular scenario like that, we can prompt it to the merchandiser and then get their input, but those are edge cases. As well as if there are any approvals or any other additional governance required among the data entry, we can apply notifications and then typical workflow related activities to this particular solution. And we identify what we have to do, and then within, I think, a couple of days, we managed to build this entire solution, and
Awesome.
we went back to the CEO. So it was evening, and he was doing his daily exercises. He was on the treadmill, and we told him we managed to automate this process, and now you don't need this 100% data entry team. Literally, he fall off from the treadmill because he couldn't believe that that kind of an impact we could have made within a shorter time period. So this is one example, and there are many like that. But I think you can understand, identify like why we made a huge success, because we apply the first principles there, dig into the root problem, as well as we open the feedbacks, as well as we question all the assumptions and started building the solution.
That's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing. It brings a number of things to my mind. The first thing is it is a classic example of how humans go to the most fundamental approach of project management or of contact center management or queue management, which is throwing more bodies at a problem in order to solve it. Like, let's say that there is a congestion or there is a block or there's an impediment somewhere. Our gut reaction has been for ages to just add more people to it, and that comes from the Tayloristic approach or the industrial revolution approach in the workforce, where they think that just adding more bodies to it is going to solve the problem, when in reality it actually increases the manual friction. So that's a really good example of that. The other thing that your story highlights to me is that what went on, if we can take a step back and analyze this particular case study, what happened was there was action to understand the current state of what was happening, and then clearly articulate what the desired state was, right? And in other words, that's literally what the vision of a business transformation is. You want to understand the current state and then go to the desired state. So the vision was clearly articulated, and then the team were empowered and they had rigorous discussion on understanding the why, like why were these things happening. So I'm pretty sure something like a five whys exercise or a root cause analysis would have been done, where they were able to peel back the onion, where you and the team were able to peel back the onion and try to figure out things using the first principles. So that's a really good example of that. And then finally, for the solution, is much more rooted in the scientific method, or in developing the strategy first and then making sure that we reduce the manual friction, introduce more of the technology, bring more of an automation and a lean approach to solving the problem, and eventually having success. Like, you were able to capture the data and measure it and then quantify the value that was being delivered through your process. So that's an amazing story. Just wanted to highlight those things, like how first principles can actually change the way people think and approach to solving a complex problem.
Exactly. So I think those are kind of transformation stories that we can see in the field. And another side of this story is about the product development, and we see a lot of product development companies are blindly following what customers are telling, as well as blindly following what the industry analysts are telling, and then try to build products based on those input. I think the danger with that is you will build something that is barely addressing the problem without again applying the first principles and digging deep into these problems and then finding a solution. So I think a couple of examples we can take. Even you took Elon, like his Tesla. Tesla is not a car, right? It's a
Yeah.
experience. So and it's an amazing experience. So how we get that is basically digging into that problem, not like what Ford did or not like what Honda did. He created this unique experience for us by understanding and applying these principles.
Yeah, and I think the word experience is being used a lot nowadays, especially because people are realizing that that is the next part of our evolution. And we've talked about it and we've blogged about it as well. Like, we have moved from a project oriented to product oriented, and then product oriented to a service oriented, and then finally service oriented to an experience oriented. But focusing on customer experience alone, like you said, is probably going to be dangerous because the customer is only giving feedback at the end of the day. It's a feedback loop, right? So it is after the fact. It is not indicative of the problem or the challenge that the customer faced. It's just the observation that the customer had and the experience that they had that they are reporting back, which is actually a lagging indicator. From an industry analyst perspective, they probably start looking at the competitors, the market, looking at things, looking at way that the companies and product organizations are responding to the requests by the customers. So, for example, the pandemic, right? I mean, like there are so many examples of companies going digital and providing ways to improve the experience. I mean, why? Even now, I mean, like AI is the buzzword, right? AI is the new blockchain and it's a buzzword. And so everyone's trying to shoehorn AI. Every day, I'm sure every one of us gets emails about how generative AI is now being baked into everything that they do. But is it really solving the problem? Is it really addressing what needs to be done? I think those are the questions that we need to ask, especially when we're looking at making the experience for the customer and for the other stakeholders and shareholders much more better.
Exactly. I think analysts, industry analysts, they are also human, right? So they understand these things based on the market conditions as well as by talking to other vendors. So I think it's good to get feedback, but when you are making the decisions, you have to make the correct decision.
Right. And feedback is always going to be lagging indicators. That is something that we probably want to keep be very sensitive about, because when we get the information, it's a control system that we're trying to work upon. We need to use it as information and as data, but not solely be reactive and say, okay, customer said X, so we will do Y. That's not truly what true innovative product development is. And there are so many companies that do product development really really well. I mean, a classic example is Apple. Then you have Disney. You have a couple of others that actually take a step back and really really think about what the customer really needs versus what the customer is saying that they want.
Exactly. Yeah, so I think we talk about first principles a lot. I think then the next question is if somebody is completely new to this concept, then how they can learn. I think one advice that I can give is follow Ray Dalio. So he's the founder of Bridgewater, the one of the world's largest hedge funds firms. So he has this book called about a book called Principles. That's a really good book to get the basics of this thought process, as well as there are a number of interviews that he has done. And his latest book is about more predictions about what's really happening in the economy. That's a very interesting book as well, but not about first principles. So if somebody's starting to gather this data and then start learning, I think that will be a really good start that I would like to recommend.
I plus one to that. Ray Dalio's book, Principles, Your Guided Journal, is an amazing book. So I would recommend it as well. It really helped me strengthen my thoughts around first principle thinking. And especially because Asanka and I, we work in business transformations day in and day out. It has helped us ask the right questions, try to get to what value we are trying to get out of it, what the experience really is, what are the true impediments, and how we can solve it. So I would highly recommend that book as well.
Yeah, I would like to add one more thing to that. He released another book called My Principles. It's basically guides with empty pages to create your own principles. And
Nice.
that's a really good guideline as well, in addition to the basic book.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for that. And as always, we are going to add these links in our blog when we release this video. So feel free to look at the show notes at the bottom of it and Thank you for listening to another lively episode of Spirited Dialogue. Today, we talked about how we can leverage the first principles thinking for innovative product design. Reasoning by analogy is really easy. First principles thinking needs really deep thinking, and Asanka mentioned Ray Dalio's book, and we'll put that in the link, and that's an amazing book to start with. There are also a number of videos and interviews that he's given, and he talks about his thought process and how he goes about it. We also learned that through the power of first principles thinking, we first have to identify and then challenge our assumptions that we have. Secondly, we need to separate the problem into its fundamental principles. And then finally, we need to use our understanding to create new strategies and solutions to the problem. And it's not just for product management or for product design. First principles thinking can be used for solving any kind of complex problem. It's used a lot in business transformation. And as you start using your first principles thinking, you'll start realizing how much of it is actually adopted in solving those mission critical value streams and making them much more modern. Um, we also talked about how the first principles can help create the products that not only meet the customer expectations but also exceed it. And then finally, Asanka shared a story about how a business was able to leverage this first principles thinking to create a much better competitive advantage, experience, cost savings, better business strategy, and so on, which is real business transformation. So
Exactly.
I hope you all enjoyed this episode as much as we did. As always, please reach out to us through the contact form or on social media, and we're happy to hear your thoughts and insights, and even continue to this conversation further. So until next time, from all of us at Transformity, cheers.
Thank you, and catch you in another episode.